Okay, here we are again, Backyard Professor Live Sessions. I am very excited for this morning's session. I advertised it last night in my previous podcast. I did have a session this morning where I talked more about the book on called Method Infinite. Dr. Nick Literski is going to join me today. He is one of the authors of the book. He is the main author because he's the one that started this magnificent project 20 years ago. Now, we've been waiting for 20 years and kind of somewhat in the last 10 ribbing him and Cheryl Bruno and Joe Steve Swick about it. When's the book going to come out? When's the book going to come out? What are you saying in it and all that? Well, they promised to deliver, and holy cow, they have delivered. We've got a tremendous book of learning for us to jump into. I have reached out to both Dr. Literski and to Cheryl Bruno, and they have both agreed to come on the show here and give us their perspective, give us their desires and wishes for the book, tell us about their research, tell us why they're interested in this subject, etc. And so this is going to be a very fun discussion with Dr. Nick Literski. He told me a little bit about his background. I'm going to just share what I wrote down. I wasn't smart enough to pull out my pen immediately, so I'm going to share some ideas, and if he wants to elaborate on that, he more than can. Oh, hey, Doug Vincent, welcome, and Gail Capson, welcome. Good to see you again, Gail. You were here earlier this morning. I'm going to have Doug Vincent, pay attention, you, on today at 2:00 to also discuss his understanding of Method Infinite. He purchased the book on my recommendation a week or so ago when I was ranting and raving about it, and I will continue ranting and raving about it for several years, I'm sure. So I love some of his ideas. So we will get talking together this afternoon, Vince. Cancel all appointments. You're coming on with me, pal. Dr. Literski. I have known him online. I have never met him yet. I would love to make that happen someday in this particular incarnation. I became good friends with him online. It was his and Joe Swick's influence and spirit and attitude that helped me decide to become a Freemason. So I'm very grateful for that. But one thing I noticed about Nick, when we were on various message boards or email lists or whatever, you banter back and forth and you have conversations and all, he always seemed to have what I would call an upper crust answer, not in the negative fashion of being hoity-toity. There's nothing hoity-toity about Dr. Literski. He is in his mid-50s, and he has acquired his doctorate degree. Now, come on. That's impressive. Don't tell him I said that. It'll swell his head. However, I'm just saying, I'm just so proud to be associated with him, to know that here's a man who has such an incredible drive, such a determination, that in his 50s, he acquires a PhD in depth psychology, DEPTH. When he told me that yesterday on the phone, I go, depth psycho. It's a weird word, isn't it? So it's DEPTH. So I'm very excited to have Dr. Literski on this program. He has 2 master's degrees. That's just so cool to know. One in spiritual guidance. Now, Nick has never lost the esoteric angle of his research and his attitudes. And then his other master's was in depth psychology, which did prepare him to receive his doctorate just earlier this year. So it is a thrill for me to have Dr. Literski on. I've got him on the phone. What I'm going to do is I'm going to monitor the chat for the few minutes and make sure that you can hear him. So Dr. Literski, I have introduced you with what I remembered writing down. Welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Kerry. I appreciate being here. Hopefully everybody can hear me.
So far as I can tell, they can. Would you guys let me know if you can hear Dr. Literski? This is going to be a phone interview. What I would like to do first, Dr. Literski, why don't you? I know it's not in a way of being arrogant or, okay, I'm going to move this phone just a little bit. He says you're just a little faint, not bad, but not in the way of arrogance or egotism, but would you just kind of tell us about your journey into receiving your master's degrees, plural, and your doctorate degree, and here you've stuck with 20 years of research, and then you finally got this book out. Would you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So this book really had its origin in 2002. At that time, I was living in Nauvoo, and throughout my life, I had always had an interest in Freemasonry. When I was growing up in Washington State, our little town had a Masonic temple right down in the center of town, and the architecture of it and the signage and everything just always intrigued me. I remember even as a little kid, always looking for that building whenever we drove downtown.
Oh yeah.
And so finally in 2002, I decided to reach out to the fraternity, and as a result, I actually became the first Latter-day Saint to be initiated in Freemasonry within Hancock County, Illinois, since the Mormons left in the 1840s.
Oh wow.
So I joined Denver Lodge number 464 there in Hancock County. Wonderful, wonderful men. And prior to that, I had been very steeped in Joseph Smith's teachings and in the history of Mormonism. And so when I went through the ceremonies, the 3 Blue Lodge degrees of Freemasonry, I just kept getting pinged on Joseph over and over. I just kept hearing things that he had said or things that he had done that kept lining up with what was happening in those ceremonies.
Yeah.
And
so this is while you were in Illinois then?
Yes, sir.
Going through the Masonry in Illinois. Oh, well, that's fantastic. That's interesting.
Yeah. And so, kind of naively at the time, I thought, well, gosh, maybe Freemasonry was a prophecy of Joseph Smith.
Right.
That's what actually got me started in the research. Don't look for that in the book. It's not true. It's not but that curiosity is what got me started.
That's spectacular.
And so being there in Hancock County gave me the advantage of having access to a lot of original records. And what I found in doing that is that so many other authors over the years had either misunderstood what they were reading because they were not Masons, or in some cases they outright misquoted the sources. And what seemed to have happened is one person would look at that and write whatever they wanted, and everybody else played telephone because nobody went back and rechecked the originals. So, for example, I had the chance to look into the original minute books of Bodley Lodge in Quincy, which interacted with Nauvoo Lodge.
How far back did those go in date?
I don't remember the founding date, to be honest.
But you were back in Joseph Smith's era in those lodge minutes. Yes. Oh yeah, wow.
Yes, I was looking at the original minutes from that time. And just to give you an example of how that made a difference, a lot of Mormon writers, and you discussed these the other night on your show, a lot of LDS writers in particular would talk about the fact that the Mormons first asked for a recommendation to allow a lodge in Nauvoo from Bodley Lodge in Quincy.
Uh-huh.
In Masonic practice, you need to get that recommendation from the nearest lodge.
Okay. Uh-huh.
But what had happened is none of the Nauvoo Masons had ever bothered to go visit Bodley Lodge. So
now, how far away was
brethren,
the bodily lodge from Nauvoo, Dr. Literski?
50 miles.
50 miles. So within a day and a half travel anyway.
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So none of them had gone there. And therefore, nobody in Bodley Lodge had ever sat in lodge with any of the individuals who were trying to form the Nauvoo Lodge.
Oh.
You have, in order to issue that recommendation, you have to know them as Masons.
Okay.
In other words, you have to have sat in lodge with them.
Right.
And since that had never happened, they could not, under the laws of Freemasonry, issue that recommendation. That's all laid out very clearly in the records. But many Mormon writers instead posed this as religious prejudice.
Oh, what an interesting, that you can kind of, see, there's the value of having the original records, because now we can kind of detect where a particular bias is in order to get a certain point of view presented and believed. Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did a lot of travel over the next several years. Even went down to Arkansas, for example, to the lodges in the towns where members of the Baker Francher wagon train came from, those who were involved in the Mountain Meadows Massacre. I went back to those lodges and talked to the lodge secretaries in those areas. And, because I was a Freemason, that gave me a certain amount of access.
Sure.
And instant friendship, if you will.
Sure.
So I had, for example, one of these secretaries opened up a back closet, dug through boxes clear in the back of the closet in an orange crate that was layered with duct tape. that had never been opened in his memory in his decades in the lodge. And he opened that up, and in there was a handwritten record from the lodge.
Wow.
And that handwritten record showed that people involved in the trial and massacre of Parley P. Pratt were members of that lodge.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, he was. When was he killed? 1854.
I believe that's correct, yes.
Yeah.
But, this, and of course, Hector McLean, the one who led and actually carried out the killing, it is openly said that he gathered some of his Masonic brothers to aid him in that. And there are other details in the killing that make it clear that it was aimed at the fact that Parley P. Pratt had essentially violated his Masonic obligations by taking on Eleanor McLean as a wife when she was not divorced.
Oh, interesting. Now that puts an extra light on this as well, because the dialogue, the discussion is, well, Parley Pratt was an apostle and he was out doing his missionary work, and so it is a religious prejudice. Boy, I mean, this is direct, right, spot on research from the greatest primary source you could get, isn't it? I mean, this is pristine research. I love this. That's awesome. You had to be thrilled.
Oh, I was, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so this is the problem that has been the case before Method Infinite. You had Masons who tried to write on the similarities without really understanding Mormonism. You had Mormons trying to write, usually apologetics, without really understanding Freemasonry.
Yeah.
So even with the best of intentions, these authors didn't know what they were reading half the time.
That's that game of telephone you were talking about. Yeah.
Right. So before this book, the only person who had an attachment to both traditions was Merv Hogan. He never formally published anything. He put out a lot of little monographs that he self-distributed.
Now, he was the Salt Lake Mason, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yeah, he just
His case,
recently
though,
passed
that was
away, didn't he?
quite some time ago, actually.
Oh, really?
He's
Yeah.
been dead quite a while. Yeah.
Oh, I've read it.
But
I've
yeah,
read a little bit of his stuff. He's fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of it's really good. Some of it's less founded.
Iffy, yeah.
But Merv Hogan was a member of the LDS Church, but nominally.
Right.
And it shows up in his writing.
Sure.
He doesn't actually have much of a grasp on Mormon history.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is what we brought to the table. Joe and I both had strong histories in Freemasonry, strong involvement. Joe more so than me, and as well as a long history of membership in the LDS Church and study of its doctrine and history.
Sure.
And of course, Cheryl came in with her studies of the esoteric
mm-hmm.
and her own strong backing in Mormon history. So three of us were able to really weave together our strengths.
Yes.
Perspectives.
Yeah,
that's in a way that really worked beautifully.
It really did. I'm here to tell you that what I'm hoping might occur because of the way you guys teamed up is more. Wouldn't it be really interesting to team up with, say, a Freemason and a Mormon and combine ideas with multiple authors more often, simply because I think you've demonstrated very well in Method Infinite that three heads are so much more interesting than one. I mean, there's that one chapter on the Female Relief Society and the Masonic aspects of it that Cheryl elaborated from a paper of hers. That was a nice touch, right? So, that's awesome.
Yeah, and so I worked on the book. Frankly, I had about 100 pages of manuscript completed. And then in the course of all this, I had a shift in my faith perspective. And I also, came to terms after many years with the fact that I was gay. And so I resigned my membership in the LDS Church.
And when was that, Nick?
That was in 2006.
2006, okay.
And I divorced. I moved away from Nauvoo.
Mm-hmm.
And I became very busy in rebuilding my life, as you can imagine.
Oh, sure.
So over the next few years, I was not making a whole lot of progress on the manuscript and such. So I finally decided that it was more important that this get out into the world rather than me just sitting on it. So I turned over the research materials to Joe Steve Swick,
okay,
who had every bit as much background as I did, if not more, to write this book. Joe and I had many, many conversations about the evidence that we had found and how these things work together. But Joe was not making much progress on the manuscript itself either. He was organizing and thinking. Eventually, Joe met Cheryl, and she became involved in the project. And, thank goodness for Cheryl, because she was the one saying, we have to stop organizing things and write.
Oh, yeah, the woman's touch. That's very interesting. Yeah, you needed a writer. The researcher was covered. You and Joe covered that angle very well. Yeah, I had a whole lot of sometimes full day-long conversations with Joe myself when you guys were working on this manuscript. And by that time, I had become a Freemason. And so we were kind of talking and elaborating about some of the ideas that you guys were discussing and finding and all that. But I wasn't aware of that. Cheryl had gotten involved until way later, and then it was actually being put to paper. So what a great team.
So Cheryl, I kind of joke that this is a 20-year gestation. and Cheryl was the one who carried this baby to term, because
but there you go.
The vast majority of the fingers to keyboard and getting the manuscript out and done was Cheryl's work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cheryl brought me back in to take a more active role again for the last few years.
Oh, good.
As
Good.
things were finalized, and I helped make some changes in the end as well. But we really were able to work together in a way that worked beautifully.
Yeah, it really did. You can tell. Yeah. You can tell by the writing and the chosen subject matter. Essentially, you just basically began before Joseph Smith was born, giving the a little bit of, enough of a direction in the historical context, and then you just simply went all the way through Joseph Smith's life. And I have to say, really, I know it was supposed to be a much larger book than it is. It is a wonderful sized book. And of course, I could read 5 more of this kind of caliber, this size. So you guys might have some follow-ups to do. Who knows? But the way you ended it on Joseph Smith, I thought was a good move. Instead of taking it all the way up into Salt Lake City, Brigham Young, maybe that's a second book or third or whatever. But yeah, that was well done.
I think you're going to see a number of articles from Cheryl and I.
Oh, good.
In the future, fleshing out some interesting stories that could not be included in the book.
Oh, we're very looking forward to that.
Yeah, whether just a matter of editing or the fact that we did stop essentially with Joseph's life. There are interesting things that happened after that.
There are,
and stories to be told that we will probably be publishing articles in addition to this.
Excellent. I have a question that's been asked in chat. If I could just ask you real quick. Sure. Let's kind of include the good morning, Gail. Good to see you. It is by Absalom. And Absalom asks, is it true that Joseph shouted, "Is there no help for the widow's son," when he was shot? Would you like to address that one briefly?
Absolutely. So as Joseph was leaping or falling out of the window of the second story of Carthage jail, he called out the words, "O Lord, my God." And that's as far as he got before he was shot and fell down to the ground outside the jail. It is clear from sources that people in the know were absolutely clear that he was offering the grand hailing sign of distress of Master Mason.
Okay.
John Taylor, for example, wrote an excoriating editorial after the murder and said, what think ye, brethren of the mystic tie? And went on to describe how there were Masons in the crowd outside the jail and Joseph's call had gone unanswered.
Yeah.
There have been other authors who have tried to argue against this fact. And we talk about the alternate views in the book.
Sure. A little bit.
Writers have tried to say, he was just praying because he was going to be brought into the celestial kingdom.
Right.
That is certainly not what, leading Latter-day Saints of the time said he was doing. And, one of their arguments is that, there's a hand motion or an arm motion associated with that grand hailing sign of distress.
Right.
And what they don't realize is that, in Masonic ritual, particularly in Illinois, you are specifically told that, yes, the ideal form is the words and the gesture, but any Mason who sees the gesture or hears the words is expected to respond.
So
in other words, given the situation, either the gesture alone or the words alone are just as legitimate, if you will,
sure,
of an exercise of that call as the full performance would be.
Yeah, that's interesting. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we do believe it was just abundantly clear that's what Joseph is doing.
Okay, thank you.
That begs the question, of course, because you did have Masons in the crowd, and they did not run to his defense.
Right.
And there were reasons for that. Aside from the fact that they were there to kill him in the first place, the fact is the Nauvoo Lodge and its members had already been declared clandestine.
Exactly. I was going to say there was already friction within the fraternity with Nauvoo and the Grand Lodge, wasn't it?
Sure.
Not to mention
Absolutely.
the other lodges. Yeah. They were
Yeah.
talking about, they were complaining a lot about quite a few irregularities, is what they called it, I believe, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And because those irregularities were not solved, their dispensation was pulled by the Grand Lodge.
It was pulled,
They
and
were
the Mormons ignored it.
Yes.
Yeah.
In the Nauvoo, if you read the Nauvoo Lodge minutes, it discusses the fact that the Grand Lodge has revoked their charter, and they essentially give the middle finger to the Grand Lodge and continue working as a lodge.
Yeah.
But by that time, by the time of the murder of the Smiths, everybody knows that the Nauvoo Lodge and its members are clandestine, and therefore they are not regarded by other Masons as legitimate.
Oh, okay. Now that brings up, I've got another patron, Mike Weist, asking, did the other Masons consider the Nauvoo Lodge as illegitimate?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, outside of the Nauvoo Lodge, they of course kept saying, "Well, no, we're not illegitimate. Not only that, we're going to keep right on trucking, man." So yeah,
right.
So there was tension there.
Yeah, I should clarify. There were already other Mormon lodges in existence by that time, and of course, they didn't consider the Nauvoo Lodge illegitimate, even though all of these Mormon lodges were declared clandestine. Joseph's intention all along had been to multiply the Mormon lodges and then create a Mormon Grand Lodge.
A Mormon Grand Lodge. Yeah, you say that in that book. Yeah. That's interesting. And that is probably the basis for the fear factor with the other Mason lodges and the Grand Lodge, because if these guys are going to be doing the irregular work and they're not really paying attention to the Masonic protocol, heaven forbid they get their own Grand Lodge, and then it's going to further split the brotherhood.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I've got another comment here for you, Nick. By Mormon Yeshiva, he says, well, Brigham Young did call the temple celestial masonry, which is very interesting. So the early brethren as well were basically, their descriptions of this helps show why your book so wonderfully incorporates the undercurrent of Freemasonry all throughout Mormonism, whether doctrines, scripture, or the ritual, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And if you look on the cover on the dust jacket of Method Infinite, you'll see on the table in front of Joseph and Hiram, there are the celestial and terrestrial globes and a little model of a cornerstone laying. These were actually identified in Heber C. Kimball's journal as items sitting on a table in the celestial room of the Nauvoo Temple. So this idea that the endowment was celestial masonry was taken in a very literal sense.
Yeah, I'm showing the cover now, Nick. Yeah, we can see the two glow. Now, is there any? I know the cover was designed by another gentleman. Is there a significance to each one of the books that are being held?
There's not.
They're just
Joseph
holding
Johnston,
books.
Right. Joseph Johnston, who prepared the cover, really would love to have done that, and would love to have had them open to particular passages even, but simply trying to deal with the size.
Sure.
That was impossible to do clearly.
Sure. Hey, also, while I've got this cover up, Dr. Literski, could you, do you think that there is I noticed behind Joseph. Now, is that Hiram also?
Yes.
Joseph and Hiram. I know it's behind. They have drawn in that Jupiter talisman from his magic seeking, or treasure seeking days. Do you think there's a tie-in with Freemasonry with talisman like that?
Absolutely.
Oh, really? Yeah. Would you like to elaborate on that for us? That would be fascinating.
Sure. So if you look at early Masonic sources, the idea of wonder working shows up as something attributed to Masons. That phrase, wonder working, is talking about ceremonial magic, of which talismans play a large part. The Jupiter talisman itself is specifically created on the basis of a book called the Magus. It was published in 1801.
Francis Barrett.
And
I've got that.
Right. And we know that it's the Magus in particular because there was a small mistake in the formation of Joseph's Jupiter talisman.
Yeah.
That matches a small printing error in the Magus.
In the Magus, yeah. Who was it that did the?
That's where it came from.
Yeah. Who was it?
The talisman itself. Joseph carried on his person. Yeah. And this gets argued by apologists who say, well, there was an inventory of everything Joseph had on his person. And that doesn't say a Jupiter talisman on there.
Right.
But it does, the inventory does say that various coins were found. And understand, this talisman is an inch to an inch and a half
is a metal.
round.
Yeah. Looks like a coin.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, this came in, these items were returned to Emma. Emma eventually gave the Jupiter talisman to her stepson, Charles Bittman, and told him that it was Joseph's Masonic piece, of which was
that's right,
of which he was very fond.
Yeah.
And that it had been on his person when he was killed.
And that's been debated now, right? That was his view.
Right. Obviously, just as you talked earlier about some Mormon writers trying to distance Freemasonry, they've also tried to distance magic. Because you just said something about this from his treasure hunting days. That's not likely. This is likely something he actually acquired much later in life.
But interesting.
Regardless of when he did,
he had
it at the end.
Yep.
Wilford Wood then acquired it from Charles Bittman.
Sure.
Apologists love to try to distance this from Joseph. Ken Godfrey, dear man, I worked with him years ago.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I really disagree with some of what he concluded.
Sure, I do too. Yeah.
And part of what he said, well, just because he had it doesn't mean he believed in it. Kind of odd arguments like this.
Right.
But
right. Yeah.
The fact is, Joseph did have it, and that thread of magic was closely associated in Joseph's formation and his time period with Freemasonry. There will be more coming out on this topic. Joseph,
good.
Ceremonial magician. That's actually my next book project. So I'm
sensational. That's great to hear. So you are working on another project then?
I am.
Wonderful. That's spectacular. Great.
And I promise not to take 20 years to do it.
Oh, please don't. I don't know if you and I are young enough to endure that, but exactly. I don't know though, the nice thing, I mean, to put a positive spin on that 20-year deal, really, the nice thing is it gave it a chance to percolate somewhat. Yeah. And so, and it gave you guys a chance to move back and forth, seesaw, continue your researching. And I mean, to type up a 500-page book, Cheryl had to be at work on this for quite a while too, and her bringing you back in the end. And so it's all good from my take of it, because it made a better book from my point of view. So
yeah, I would say the only downside of how long it took us is that we shared some of our research a little too freely in earlier years, and discussing with others.
Yeah.
And I can say there have been a handful of writers in Mormon history who promptly published things that we had shared with them.
Oh, yeah.
That would have been, new revelations in Myth and Infinite. There are still plenty of new revelations.
Oh boy, aren't
Infinite,
there
but
though? Yeah,
some
I
of the
get
things
it.
that look familiar are because people, frankly, took our research away with it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, you're trying to. There's a type of a scholarly camaraderie that you want to have, and yet on the other
Right.
hand, you want to keep the scholarly legitimacy and the discoveries of the original author. For the, I mean, you did the leg. Boy, did you do the legwork! That's fascinating that you got down in Arkansas and you actually had the original wreck. I mean, that is stellar research. Would they have? I don't suppose they would have let you take photographs of that and put it in any kind of an article. Or, I mean, you didn't seem to do that. Would that have been wrong to do? Showing the primary research in a photo. I guess you'd have had to get permission if you'd have thought that angle. But
exactly.
yeah, I mean, right.
And I would say, given all this time, I suspect that original launch secretary probably is no longer with us.
True. Yeah.
He
That
was quite elderly at the time.
Was he? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating.
But I certainly had permission to use the material in my research and such, but I did not seek permission to just outright publish the record.
Right.
And I would not feel that was ethical without the lodge's express permission.
Sure. Yeah. No, as it is, I'll tell you personally what I thought was when. I mean, the opening shot of the influence of Freemasonry on Joseph Smith was really exceptional. But the one thing that just really stunned me was this faculty of Abrac. That was so spectacularly done, and its relationship to Masonic legendary material philosophy. I had studied the faculty of Abrac, and of course, it was through at the time, the Greek magical papyri, right? The Betz translation, because they have all those really cool little triangular diagrams with the letters of Abrac, A and then AB and then AB. Yeah, and so. But the way you guys did, because we know Lucy Smith really legitimately, she said, well, we weren't off just doing the faculty of Abrac.
Right.
We were trying to be good citizens and neighbor. They had a rough time, man. I mean, that was a tough time to constantly have to move and lose your ginseng trade.
Right.
I mean, that had to have devastated Joseph Sr. So, but I loved how you guys did that faculty of Abrac. Would you like to talk about that? Do you care, or do we want to leave it for our readers?
Well, we can certainly talk about that. Like you said, Lucy Mack Smith has this wonderful passage where she says, it shouldn't be supposed that we spent all of our time drawing magic circles and pursuing the faculty of Abrac.
That's right. Yeah,
to the point of neglecting any other important matters.
There you go.
But
yeah.
Notice she doesn't reduce she doesn't sideline or reduce the importance of those activities.
Not
she
at
says, all. Yes, there were other important things we tended to as well.
But she did put that faculty of Abrac in the important issue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the faculty of Abrac, as you said, in magical papyri and other magical sources, this is a process really of seeking after the divine name.
That is what is so fabulous about this. I would have never put that together. How did you guys come to that? That is just so interesting.
It's actually discussed in Masonic books of Joseph Smith's time.
George Oliver, the Antiquities. And
George Fort's Antiquities of Freemasonry. So this idea, the name of deity, the true name of God, is considered in a lot of these sources it's also referred to as the grand omnific word, or the grand omnific word of creation. It's the word God spoke by which he created things.
Okay.
That tradition is directly associated with the lost word in Freemasonry.
Yeah, so that's a really big connection. When did Lucy talk about this was before Joseph became a Mason, of course. Her husband was already a Mason, though, right?
Yes.
At that time,
he was, but barely at the time that she's talking about.
Was it?
So Joseph Sr. was clearly very interested, I would almost say obsessed, with Masonic legend. Back in Vermont, he began digging for treasure. And of course, that's a magical practice, but there was more going on to it.
This is Joseph's father, right? This is Joseph's father. Okay, all right.
Right, Joseph Sr.
Okay.
In Freemasonry, there is the legend that the master's word was engraved on a triangular plate of gold.
Yeah.
And hidden underground. Well, by the time Joseph Smith's family begins working with these things, we already have authors like Josiah Priest who are trying to say that the Native American peoples are of the 10 tribes of Israel.
Okay. Uh-huh.
And for example, the Dartmouth seal, for example, and Dartmouth College was the parent institution of Moore's Charity School that Hiram Smith attended as a young person.
Oh, good connection.
That original Dartmouth seal actually shows a Native American person holding a book open and forward as a row of other Native Americans walk behind him. So this idea becomes one where, this golden artifact could have been brought here. And
there you
people
go.
People are already finding valuable items and precious metals in Native American burial mounds.
Yeah, they are. That was a big deal. I loved how you guys brought that out too. Yeah.
It's interesting that every place the Mormons moved, up to and including Nauvoo, had native burial mounds.
Native mounds. Yeah.
There are stories of excavating these mounds and moving the earth to make way for streets in Nauvoo, for example.
Zelph the White Lamanite. Yes.
Right. So you have Joseph Sr. doing this treasure digging. It shows up in his dreams even. He has a dream in which this angel comes to him and says, well, you still lack one thing. And instead of saying, well, just tell me what I need to do, Joseph Sr. takes this as something he needs to know. And he says, well, let me grab a pen and paper in his dream. And the angel says, okay. And in his rush in the dream to grab pen and paper, he wakes himself up.
Oh, man.
One thing.
That would suck.
Yes.
Oh, man.
Meanwhile, the newspapers in the area are publishing poetry and stories about these same Masonic legends. This is the culture and the milieu in which Joseph Sr. is already operating. So by the time, just one more thing, the Grand Lodge of Vermont was formed at this time. And I did a study as part of this research of naming patterns of male children in Vermont. And right when the Grand Lodge of Vermont was created, a whole lot of parents in Vermont started naming their boys Hiram.
Yeah.
After Hiram Abiff in Masonic legend.
That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
The peak of that, before it starts to slow down, is the year that Hiram Smith is born there in Vermont. So he's named according to that tradition.
So Joseph Sr. jumped into that, didn't he? By naming his kid Hiram. Yeah. Interesting.
However, Joseph Sr. tried to join Federal Lodge number 15 in Vermont, which had some Smith family members in it.
Is that the one that rejected him originally?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah.
Somebody voted against him. He was blackballed.
Right.
We don't know the exact reason because no one has to give that reason. But there are some possibilities. One is that he was known to abuse alcohol in his earlier years.
Right.
Another is the ginseng failure that you brought up earlier. The merchant who took advantage of the Smiths and took their money in the ginseng episode turned out to be a family member of somebody in the lodge.
Yeah.
And that happened after Joseph was blackballed, but already he was becoming a competitor against his other family in the ginseng business.
Yeah, I was impressed when you guys tracked down the actual value of Joseph Sr.'s ginseng business. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars here. That back then, that's an enormous amount of money. He was doing very well, so that adds to the tenseness here.
Right.
Yeah.
And then finally, the other possible reason he was blackballed, Federal Lodge number 15 had some very sophisticated members. And this is a time period where there are still people who believe that Masonic legend is literal history, but many of them are getting away from that belief.
Oh, okay.
So, people who consider themselves smart and thinking and intellectual are getting away from that idea. To give you an idea of the caliber of the people in that lodge, one of them went on to become a Supreme Court justice.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Very interesting.
So when Joseph Smith Sr. tried to join the lodge, given his level of enthusiasm around Masonic legend as history, they may have really considered that he'd be an embarrassment. So he was rejected.
Oh, yeah. So that kind of switched the intellectual impression in the lodge, wouldn't it? Yeah. And Joseph Sr. was absolutely full go gung ho. Well, the treasure dig he was the one that actually said too. You guys pointed this out real well too. It was, and I think Mike Quinn talked on this, but it's been so long since I've actually completely reread Quinn that this was kind of a good refresher that Joseph Sr. actually wanted to get Joseph Jr. his seer stone. And he said that to people around him.
This is what I was going to say next.
Oh, sorry to jump the gun.
No worries. But yes, when Joseph Smith Jr. is born, and I want to point out that Joseph Smith Jr. is born 1 or 2 days away from the solstice.
And St. John's Day, wasn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which I think is significant. There's no way to prove it, but I've always wondered if his conception and perhaps birth, given early folk remedies, which there were things to induce labor, for example. I sometimes wonder if they tried to get him born on that day.
Oh, on the solstice. Could have.
Yeah, but that's neither here nor there. We can't prove it.
Right.
But the point is, when Joseph Jr. was born, Joseph Sr. ran around town telling everybody that Joseph Jr. was born with a caul, which means part of the amniotic sac was over his face. This had a long history in folklore of being the signifier of a prophet or seer.
Oh,
So he told people that Joseph had a caul, and specifically told them that the time would come when they would find him a stone and that he would be able to look in that stone and see anything he wished. So Joseph was trained and formed from birth.
Raised,
to become what he was.
Yeah, that's a real important insight using the historical record that I don't recall. And it's not like I'm a massive Mormon history reader, but I've done my somewhat mild fair share. I don't know if any Mormon has ever indicated that in that angle before. And I thought that was one of the better parts of your book, to get us into the context of look at what we're going to do here in the book. So that was really important for me personally. I thought, wow, this is from the get-go with the patriarch of the family. So good stuff.
So yeah, And so, to give you an idea, Hosea Ballou, who was the Universalist minister, circuit rider, that actually taught where the Smiths live, was also a prominent Freemason in the area.
Oh, how interesting. Yeah.
Some of his Masonic speeches are published. One in particular, he lists out the things that a person must know in order to have faith in God. And it is a dead ringer for many of the articles of faith that Joseph Smith later wrote. So these influences are with Joseph right away from birth.
Mm-hmm.
And as you read Method Infinite, you'll realize that Joseph's whole mission ends up toward ultimately recovering that lost word.
Yeah.
In his early years, you had writers, prominent Masons, who were saying that the time would come when pure Christianity and pure Freemasonry would both be restored, and they would be hand in hand.
Yeah, I actually indicated that was one of the themes for me that just made this book a page turner, is because this idea that Joseph Smith, now the Mormon dialogue, the Mormon story, and it is true, it's okay, let's go ahead and grant them this. Joseph Smith was to restore Jesus's church. But now we know, based on the fuller context, I'll say, of the Masonic influence, Joseph Smith was wanting to also restore the Freemasonry, which George Oliver in his Antiquities said goes all the way back before Adam. In the heavens with the angels were Freemasons. And then he brings it to earth right from the start, Adam, and then they handed it down from there. That is what Joseph Smith was putting back in. That was an eye-opener for me, Dr. Literski, because as missionaries, we go out and we say, well, Joseph Smith brought back Jesus's true church. And that's as far as the Mormon version goes. You guys pulled this thing all the way back again to the beginning. Whether it's the beginning of Joseph Smith's life, not his very tail end when he joined, or the beginning of the world, Joseph Smith smack dab in it. I really appreciated that part of this book. That was an eye-opener. That expanded my horizon intellectually, scholarly, and spiritually. So that was one thing that turned me on.
Yeah. I mean, this idea that Mormonism has of dispensations, where the truth is revealed and then people fall away from it, and it has to be revealed again in a cycle of new revelation and people falling away.
Yeah.
This cycle is Masonic.
Is Masonic, yes.
You see in these early writings the idea that Masonry was revealed to Adam.
Mm-hmm.
And then, Cain becomes the origin of spurious Freemasonry.
Spurious, that was the word, yeah.
Of Masonry that is done without authority and is corrupted.
Yeah.
And eventually it has to be, again, revealed again. And you have the other patriarchs in this Masonic tradition. They're all named as Masonic grandmasters.
Yeah. From Oliver, right? Yeah, you're talking Oliver. Yeah.
So this idea of...
Oh, and by the way, I'm not trying to interrupt you. Apologize. Keep that thought for a second. Just for my audience, we do have links online to George Oliver's book, Antiquities of Freemasonry, the one that Dr. Literski and I are talking about right now. That is available for free online, just so you understand. It's an 1823 text, but that is a very critically important text that you would want to check into along with this Method Infinite.
May I just brag a little on something about that?
Sure.
Just this morning, I found a first edition 1823 of George Oliver's Antiquities of Freemasonry and purchased it.
You lucky dog. Nice find. Oh, that's got to be a treasure.
Nice addition to my library.
That's a treasure right there. Yeah. Now, and then, of course, this George Oliver was much more. I don't even know how we view him today in Freemasonry. He's much more of a like Joseph Smith Sr. He really loves the legendary, the esoteric, and he my impression from, I haven't read him completely yet, but I am working on it. But my impression of his use of the material is he is accepting more or less the historicity of this legendary material. Oh, okay, good. That's my impression. I just wanted to. Yeah. Okay.
And just
good.
to show you again, where this idea of pure Christianity and pure Freemasonry go together. George Oliver was a reverend.
Yeah. That adds to it.
He's not seeing this Masonic lore as something antithetical to religion.
Oh no.
He's tying it together.
Oh, he's putting them all together. Yeah. He wants Masonry to be Christianity.
Right.
Yeah. And that is directly in Joseph Smith's day. I'm saying that out loud for my audience, just so you guys are aware of it. It's a fun combination. What I'm doing right now is reading Method Infinite and then George Oliver's Antiquities of Freemasonry. That's a good thing to, if you like this subject, that's what you want to do.
Yeah. And other writers as well, Salem Town, for example.
Yes, Salem Town's the other one.
Another reverend, by the way.
Another reverend.
A lot of these early writers happen to be Christian clergy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think part of it have been, actually, they probably had to go a little bit silent after the Morgan affair, and then they could come back. How long did Oliver live? Do we know? When did he die?
I actually don't know.
I don't either. Isn't that crazy? But he was. All right. That's interesting. They would have had realistically the William Morgan affair just absolutely kicked out both knees of Freemasonry for a while. They probably would have had to have gone silent. Perhaps maybe that's why these Christian ministers and reverends lost their influence on the public with meshing the Christianity and Freemasonry. And yet there's Joseph Smith. What did you tell me yesterday on the phone? What did I tell you that you thought a ritual genius? Is that how?
Yeah, absolutely. Real quick to backtrack, the magic Google machine says George Oliver was born in 1782 and died in 1867. So there's that.
Oh, okay.
But yes, the interesting thing for me is, as a person who is no longer a believer in the LDS version of Mormonism, I still, having studied this history, respect Joseph as a ritual and religious genius.
That was what, yeah.
You cannot dismiss him as an ignorant fool. You cannot really dismiss him as a fraud. He is an authentic ritual and religious genius who did some truly amazing things. It's not my tradition anymore.
Right.
But it's a tradition that obviously is meaningful and has been for millions of people.
Sure. But you don't have to cut him down simply because you don't like his method or his religion anymore. Yeah. That can't possibly affect the fact that really seriously, and your book again brought this out. I loved your expression on that, because that's kind of the impression I'm kind of revamping my own input, outlook, understanding. Man, he put two and two together in so many respects. Yeah. In an inspired, creative way.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's one thing, I have encountered people at certain points, just by the fact that I am personally no longer a a member of the LDS Church, they have assumed that this book is an attack on Mormonism.
Right.
Never having read a single word of it. They just assume, because not all three of the authors are active Temple Recommend holding Latter-day Saints.
Right.
And I really find that unfortunate, because to me, this book is and always has been a love letter to what I see as beautiful and glorious in Mormonism.
That is very well put, Dr. Literski. I really like that. That's interesting.
I will admit that I have, even as an active member of the LDS Church, I identified personally much more with 1840s Mormonism than modern LDS.
Well, I mean, you've had such a fortunate experience of being the first Master Mason raised in the same state Joseph Smith was killed. Since Mormons left, that's pretty awesome. That's quite a connection. Yeah. Huh.
So this book to me is one that there's nothing in this book that should destroy faith.
I agree.
A reader who comes from a faithful perspective can't help but see, the hand of God leading Joseph through these experiences. As a non-believer, those who come to this book as non-believers, I feel, are still going to see a genius at work.
I suspect so.
A truly amazing accomplishment.
Yeah, you can't help it once you see the history.
Just a fascinating story.
Well, and then this brings up this point too, Nick. Maybe, and it's odd, I might be pulling at straws here, I don't know, but do you think that could actually be viewed by today's Mormon leaders as a threat to his status, because they have pushed so hard for the narrative to give us a conclusion that Joseph Smith wasn't like other men. He was a direct prophet from God. And, he more or less got all of his information in a vacuum. There was no environmental influence. Man, that was the big thing when I was a teenager going through seminary and preparing for my mission no. Joseph Smith was isolated. Nothing influenced him except the Lord God Almighty. So would you think, see, you're giving Joseph Smith credit, but it might be detrimental in the Mormon mind. How can we overcome that?
Well, there's been a trend in Mormon apologetics to present Joseph as an idiot.
Right.
As somebody who never read a book.
Right.
As somebody who
couldn't spell.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's so
didn't know Jerusalem had walls.
Right.
Yeah.
I won't name names, but one particular scholar was making quite a deal on Facebook for a while.
Oh, name the name. We want to know. No, you're a scholar and a gentleman. Yeah, I'm telling you.
This individual was trying very hard to prove that Joseph Smith could not have written the Book of Mormon himself because he was too stupid.
Right. Yep.
In so many words. And he's being very manipulative in how he tried to present this. But he was daring people basically to prove Joseph's IQ.
Right. Yeah.
And that if he couldn't prove that Joseph was smart enough to write this book, then it had to be from God.
Yeah, right.
This idea in Mormon apologetics is so unfortunate because it actually goes against Mormon scripture. What is the whole experience of Oliver Cowdery when he tried to translate? You have the revelation.
Good point.
Saying you took no more thought than to ask me. You need to study it out first, and then ask me if it's right.
Yeah.
So
good point.
The track that the apologists ought to be taking, from my perspective, is that Joseph was in a position to bring all these threads together with, call it creativity, call it inspiration, call it revelation, call it what you will. And that's going to be your lens. but he brought these influences together in a particular way.
After all, isn't that what a restorer does, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the Old Testament, and I'm sorry, I'm blanking the name of which prophet it is that found the older writings.
Josiah.
Yeah. Josiah.
It was a king. He was a king. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah. King Josiah was in this position of finding the records that had been essentially lost.
Oh, there you go. Right.
And as I understand it, likely altered them, but brought them forth and restored them to the Israelite people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one interpretation.
So, yeah. So this idea, I think we need to give Joseph credit. And it does not harm faith to say that he was brilliant and that he brought all these things together.
Yeah.
You can say this is what he did, and he had divine inspiration in doing that. If that's the perspective, that is completely consistent.
It is. Yeah. That actually gives a better consistency than the strategy of the apologetic angle, from my opinion, at this point. Now, of course, one of my good friends, one of my audience members, my patrons, T.O., he actually got me onto the Lithuanian metaphysician Algis Uzdavinis, and he is absolutely just blowing me away. That adds to the spiritual overall, well, going from darkness to light, right? The Masonic theme. There we go. In the ancient materials, and how we ought to be recognizing that the grand synthesis from the ancient mysteries, just because Platonism, one of the scholars said everything past Plato, after Plato, is just footnotes. In a way, that's accurate. In a way, it's kind of silly, but Platonism was influenced by the earlier Pythagoreans, who were influenced by the earlier Orphism, who was influenced by the ancient Egyptians. That's the ancient line, but everyone was gathering all of the various materials and synthesizing them. And that added to the luster, that added to the context and the greater spirituality and light. Why not the same with Joseph Smith?
Right.
Yeah. I love how you've done that in this book, man. It's in my opinion, it's a spectacular success. So,
well, thank you.
Absolutely, I've encouraged a lot of people to buy it, and fortunately, there's several in the audience that are saying, "Oh yeah, I've got." If not directly by the print, then they're doing the Kindle edition. So and it's fun. I'm going to be actually talking with Doug Vincent here this afternoon, 2:00, about his impression with some areas in the book that we want to talk about. So it's a lot of fun. And I'll have Cheryl tonight at 8. So I'm going to get her view too. So.
Well, if I can just put a plug in, those of you who are reading the book and are enjoying it, please go to Amazon.com and to Goodreads and leave reviews.
Yeah.
Because that is how people understand what this book is about, where this book is coming from.
Excellent point.
Yeah, it takes that word of mouth and that encouragement, because people are so used to seeing books on this topic as shallow or attack.
Yeah, and it's so neither. Yeah.
The more people say, this is my experience, this is what I learned, the more that the real impression can get out there. So please leave reviews.
Hey, T.O., how you doing? Sorry, I'm waving hi to my man in Hawaii. Good to see you. I'm glad you got on. I'm talking with Nick Literski right now, one of the authors of Method Info. T.O., this is the gentleman that got me on Uzdavinis. So yeah,
okay.
I'm glad he's in the audience now. He's 4 hours earlier, so he's up pretty early right now. So, good stuff, man. Yeah, and Doug Vincent is now saying it's definitely a must read. I'm not sure how far Doug's gotten into it. He just got it just a couple days ago, but he's probably about halfway through it. So, oh, and Debbie Joe, welcome. She's finally here. Well, Dr. Literski, let me. Debbie Joe's asking, "Are you almost done?" We don't have to be. What else would you like to say about the book? If you want to include more information, you'll definitely want to watch this video, Debbie, when you get a chance. Not a big deal that you missed it, but we're having a good time live. I hope Dr. Literski has been. I hope the level of sound has been good. I haven't seen anyone complaining when I actually moved the phone to the center of the screen here. There were a couple comments saying, yes, that's better. So I do believe they've heard you because of their comments, so.
Well, good. I'm glad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah, what questions do you guys have for Dr. Literski? We would love to field as many questions as we can. That would be wonderful. Yeah, you guys.
I see Gene Hudson. I see Gene Judson asked how many copies have been sold. I don't know exactly because there's kind of multiple venues for that. But my understanding is, a few hundred have already sold. This hardback printing, I can tell you, they printed 1,000 copies.
Oh, nice.
A portion of which they held back just as unbound text blocks, so they can do special projects later on if they choose. But this will likely be the only time you can get the book in hardback. Once the hardbacks are sold out, which I think will probably be before the end of the year, then it's going to be paperback. Which, if you're like me, you want the hardback.
I personally do, simply because I'm so hard on my books. I'll show my book here. Number one, I put all kinds of tabs in them because I like talking about it and it's easy to flip. But the second thing I always do with my books, because indexes in the back of books. Yeah, I make my own index. I have to, because indexes in books suck. So I like to cross-reference and parallel various ideas. And you can see here where I've talked about the ascent in Freemasonry. I know Joe had a major argument with Bill Hamblin when he was alive on this topic. And the more I read, the more I found. So I had to start pointing arrows up and including extra pages, because I do want to do an entire discussion on this topic of Masonic ascent. I mean, the Royal Arch, you've got the winding stairway, and yeah.
Sure. You might need to do what my best friend did, Kerry.
What's that?
My best friend bought 2 copies from me.
Okay.
One that he's going to read, and another one that he's going to keep pristine on his shelf.
Not a bad idea. Not a bad idea at all. Right. Yeah. That's a very good idea. I'm going to try like crazy to, I'm going to see after we're done. Anybody else have any questions for Dr. Literski or something you want him to talk about?
I see Mormon.
Here we go.
Did Joseph ever publicly reveal the lost word, lost name? If so, what did he say?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Wonderful question.
Yeah.
Wonderful question. And I'm going to answer it in part because the answer to that question leads into my next book.
Oh, nice. Nice. Very good. So we get the inside track here.
There is a magical aspect to the answer to that question. All that said, as you read Method Infinite, you will learn that toward the end of Joseph's ministry, he came into the lodge late one evening. The lodge was in the middle of working, and he knocks at the door to come in. He's admitted by the Tyler, and they're not in the middle of ceremony, but they're in meeting.
Yeah.
The Tyler allows him to come in, and he announces to everybody, Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. I have finally done what King Solomon, King Hiram of Tyre, and King Solomon could not do. I've established the kingdom, no more to be set down, etc. He had been meeting with the 12 and other members of the Quorum of the Anointed that day.
Okay.
As a Mason, Joseph's words on that occasion are enormously important. For those who don't know, Freemasonry, the legends of Freemasonry are surrounding this idea of a lost word.
Mm-hmm.
The lost word is an incredibly powerful word.
Mm-hmm.
It is, the word of creation. The word was known in Masonic legend by King Solomon, King Hiram of Tyre, and Hiram of If. The three of them covenanted together that they would only reveal that word if the three of them were together and united to do so.
Yeah, it took all three. Yeah.
It took all three.
Yeah.
A few workers on the temple, King Solomon's temple, became impatient. They'd been promised that once the temple was completed, they would receive the word as a reward.
Yeah.
But they became impatient, and they decided that they would confront Hiram of If in order to obtain that word.
Yeah.
And in turn, each of them demanded the word, and he refused, and they attacked him physically.
Yeah.
Finally, he was killed by the third of these, what they call ruffians.
Mm-hmm.
Because Hiram of If was killed, the covenant that the three had made could not be
fulfilled.
Operational.
Yeah.
The three no longer could do it, and the word was lost.
Mm-hmm.
So Masonry has a substitute word. But the idea is still there that the individual Mason is seeking that ultimate revelation in their own spiritual and personal development.
Yeah.
So for Joseph to say, I have done what King Solomon, King Hiram of Tyre, and Hiram of If could not do, it is exactly that. It is the fact that he has acquired and been able to pass on what he believes to be the lost
word. Oh, interesting tie-in. Yeah.
That itself, that is the crowning moment of Joseph's work.
It would be, right. Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. Oh, the other thing I'm going to try like crazy to get a hold of Dan Vogel today or tomorrow and try to get him on here too, because I was impressed with the way you guys utilized his excellent materials in the 5-volume early documents of early Mormonism. But I was also really impressed with the way Dan Vogel is well known for the Book of Mormon being an anti-Masonic book, and he makes his case really decently, not in an antagonistic manner, but he's tying that into the American political system, what is happening during the elections and the politics in the Jackson era. And you guys come along and you show how you're not refuting Dan Vogel, you're completing his analysis. There is an anti-Mormon strain in the Book of Mormon. Now, this is early in Joseph's life, you guys. This is before 1829, and yet you show also that the anti-Masonic materials in the Book of Mormon is of the spurious Masonry. Right. There is also a restored Masonry. Right. So you're it seems to me like Vogel had the half of circle very well, and you guys provided the other circle, the other half of the circle to complete. Yeah. I thought that was extremely well done and interesting. I'm hoping to get Dan Vogel on. I would like to this weekend, but if not, I'll try to get him on, because I thought that was exceptionally impressive that not only is Vogel appearing to me to be on the right track, but there is yet again, because of 20 years of fantastic research in this method infinite, you guys, Dr. Literski and Cheryl Bruno and Joe Swick were able to expand and complete the fabulous research of Dan Vogel even, and give us a better I loved that, man, that better context. So
I see Joe Walker's asking whether Joseph was ever exalted in the Royal Arch. Really, that's a really good question, and you're not the only one to ask it. We do not have evidence, direct evidence, that Joseph received the Royal Arch degrees. Mm-hmm. However, many of the early Mormons were Royal Arch Masons. Newell K. Whitney, for example, was one. Newell K. Whitney was even involved in an effort to create a Royal Arch chapter in Warsaw. We found a newspaper article that he and others had placed trying to gather together Royal Arch Masons and establish a chapter. Mm-hmm. James Adams, who of course was, what became the Deputy Grand Master of Illinois, was a Mormon, was directly involved with Joseph, was also a Royal Arch Mason and a member of the Royal Arch chapter in Springfield, Illinois. The Royal Arch chapter in Springfield followed an old tradition that many Blue Lodges did at the time, which was, instead of saying, "Oh, we meet the first Wednesday of the month," they met on the full moon. And from a practical standpoint, that allowed easier travel at night because you could see where you were going.
Sure. Yeah.
There may have been other mystical reasons for that, but that was the practical reason.
The silver light of the moon as opposed to the golden light from the sun. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Interesting.
So I actually made the effort to try to figure out the moon cycles for the time periods when Joseph went to Springfield for days at a time. It is possible that Joseph received the Royal Arch degrees in Springfield. However, the records for that time period were lost in a major fire that destroyed many records.
Book Abraham records were lost that way up in Chicago too, darn it.
Right. Yeah. It'd be and that's one thing, Cheryl and I talked about. This book is finally out, and you watch. We're going to start discovering things now that change the narrative even more.
Yeah, and it's inevitable. Yeah, that's inevitable.
Yeah, which is part of the wonderful thing of scholarship.
Yeah.
So in the book, we do not claim that Joseph received the Royal Arch. However, he certainly knew about it. The Royal Arch had already been exposed, so you could certainly read about it fully. The Morgan affair, the Morgan affair was about revealing the Royal Arch. It wasn't about the Blue Lodge. The Blue Lodge had already been exposed in numerous publications.
Excellent observation.
William Morgan was threatening to expose the Royal Arch, and that's what had people incensed. And of course, his reasoning was that the Royal Arch didn't believe his Masonic bona fides and would not admit him. So, his expose was a revenge project, essentially.
Huh. Hey, Dr. Literski, are you seeing Mormon Yeshiva's next comment? That would be. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Were you done, or I just want you to see his Nick. It is my understanding that the Royal Arch. You see that?
Right. Yeah. The Royal Arch is considered
the fourth,
at least within the chapters, as the completion of the Master Mason.
Of the Master. That was my understanding. The fourth degree, so to speak. Yeah. I just wanted to make sure you saw his comment. So that
said, that kind of separation happened prior to Joseph's time. So he can't say that by being raised a Master Mason, he received the Royal Arch.
Right.
But in this book, you'll find there are many things that we cannot point to absolute 100% proof. Right. But we have to bring the threads together.
Right.
And you bring the circumstantial threads together and you say, well, here's the argument.
The probability increases.
Here's why we think this particular thing happened. Mm-hmm. We try to be very careful of holding ourselves to that standard. And if we couldn't make the good argument, it didn't go in the book. And so, we don't say in the book that Joseph received the royal arch because we can't prove it, even though there are some evidences that he could have.
Right. Well, and that's the fun of keeping our eyes open and continuing researching. What you did in this book, Dr. Literski, in my opinion, is you upped the probability, which is the best we can do as historical researchers and writers, knowing that in the future, evidence can come along either to change to a more negative assessment or to change to a more positive assessment. And that's the best we can do. That you guys stuck to that Bayesian epistemology, whether you even knew you did or not, is part of what makes this book much better than any other book published on this subject. So really, truly, that's very much appreciated.
Yeah, there are still items related to Freemasonry that are in the church archive that are not accessible.
Yeah.
And so who knows? I've seen record of a few letters such as that.
Yeah.
So for all we know, those letters could suddenly be released.
Sure.
And add a whole lot to the story.
Yeah. Yep. Hopefully it will. That would be cool.
Yeah. That is the nature of scholarship.
Yep.
And there are things in Method Infinite that I'm sure will be either proven or disproven down the road.
Sure.
But this puts the discussion on a firm footing, at least.
Amen. Yeah. And it also gives an opportunity here. And this is the other thing that, there's so much about this book that I so enjoyed, because this is not a polemical attack. This is not even a response to what has gone before. This is a discussion, open invitation for further discussion from all angles. I really appreciate that in this book. Seriously. And it's excellent research. So you guys did the philosophical approach you did to this subject, in my opinion, needs to be done. Hopefully it'll lead the direction into an actual more useful dialogue. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The kind of dialogue that should happen, and just as an example, Jeff Bradshaw is coming out with his own book. A
good friend of mine. I like him. He's a good guy.
Yeah, he's coming out with his own book that is a discussion of Freemasonry as it reflects toward temple ordinances specifically. And he actually came to Cheryl and I with the chapters of his book and asked us to review them and offer suggestions and corrections.
Ah, nice.
Not only did he want to make sure that he was reflecting our views accurately, he wanted our help in conveying his ideas.
Now that's what it's all about.
That we don't agree with everything that Jeff is saying, and he doesn't agree with everything we're saying.
Right.
But we've been able to have this wonderful, cordial relationship where we can say, well, here's what you wrote here. Is this really what you mean to say? Because it sounds like you're saying such and such. And he's like, oh, gosh, no, that wasn't my intention. So you've been able to help him in preparing his book, even if we have very different views. That kind of discussion is what I would love to see.
That's what needs to happen.
We don't need to be at odds. We can all be looking for
the same light of knowledge.
Yes, even if we have different perspectives. I love the fact that not once has Jeff, minimized my input as a non-believer. He's completely respected my input, and I would like to think his book is going to be better for the fact that he did reach out in the way he did.
Yeah, that is good information to know. Jeff is a quality thinking man. I've known him for years. I've got both of his books on the Book of Moses, and the one is absolutely sumptuous, but he obviously knows how to put excellent thought into subjects. The fact that he has reached out and connected with you and Cheryl, that does my heart good. See, I'm actually ending up being a little bit more combative than I probably should be in anticipation of the typical Mormon apologetic. Now, I'm aware that Jeff is also in a high position associated with Dan Peterson's interpreter.
Right.
And so this is a wonderful opportunity, I think. And it sounds to me like you guys have handled this very well. We need to build bridges, not shoot each other across the flipping river now, right?
Yeah.
That would be my approach. I love how you're doing this. So serious.
And Jeff is going to be publishing a review of the book.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, he should. Oh, sure, he should. Absolutely.
And I have to give credit. I fully expected that we would see some of the old style, very ad hominem attacks.
Right.
And of course, I, as the gay apostate, become the easy target.
Sure.
That sort of thing.
Sure.
So I fully expected people to say, "Oh, this book is, not trustworthy, etc., because one of the authors is this person."
Yeah.
I have not seen anyone. Granted, like I said earlier, I have seen a couple people who are like, "Oh, you're not all believing Latter-day Saints. I'm not even going to read it." Fine, whatever.
Right.
But I've not seen anybody. I've not seen any reviewer, any serious person commenting that has gone for that kind of ad hominem argument.
This gives us hope that perhaps there is a percolating maturity that is going to bubble up from all of us from all sides to stop attacking, counterattacking, and perhaps learn together. I really like that. I really do.
I mean, even Fair, Fair has a bookstore on their website.
Uh-huh.
And I was very surprised to see they have our book being sold through their website, through their bookstore, listed on the top 4 of what they're calling recommended reading.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So it's really heartening to me that people are beginning to see it. This is not a polemical work.
It's not either.
It is a discussion of the history and an expansion of our understanding and appreciation of Joseph, whatever our lens may be.
Right. Well, kudos to Fair for that also. That is also very encouraging. So yeah, I'm thrilled to hear all this. This is why I wanted you on, Dr. Literski, because only you have these kind of insights, and they are important. And there's nothing really trivial to kind of dismiss. All of it kind of comes in the hopper, and we all come out better for having it. So this is fabulous. Any other questions, you guys, that you would like to ask Dr. Literski while he's here? We've got all the time in the world if you want. I
love Debbie Jo's comment. Fires hate historians. Yes.
Fires hate. I love that. Right? Boy, that's an insight. Yeah. Come on, historians. You got to make friends with the fire. Yowzer. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Joe Walker seems to be fairly knowledgeable. We're really glad you're here. We're glad all of you here. Mormon Yeshiva. I know I owe you a discussion also on the Jaredite barges. I know you've been after me. I've been needing to get through this weekend with the Freemasonry because I have wonderful options to share the authors and their views. So I've been taking that tack at this point, but we appreciate all of you. Okay, you guys, T.O., thank you for showing up. It's always good. Yeah, do, Mormon Yeshiva. Keep on me. I absolutely am open to discussing stuff. So not a problem. But Dr. Literski, is there anything you would like to add to find a kind of, so it seems to me like you did a pretty good sum up. I should have shut up and stopped it there.
Yeah, I mean, there are obviously many more things we could talk about.
There are.
I don't want to spill all the secrets in the book and
right,
spoil it for readers. But
well, I'll tell you what I would like to do if it's okay with you. You are so knowledgeable and you're so congenial, and this has been such a delight for the audience and for myself, and hopefully for you. What if we tentatively, of course, plan perhaps after a couple of reviews come out and we've had a chance to, I can alert you to what I find, you can alert me to what you find. Let's read those and perhaps do another get together on the show here in a couple months or two, however long it takes, doesn't matter, and kind of carry on this spirit that we're putting into effect here, thanks to your wonderful labors of making this a dialogue, not a fight. I would really enjoy seeing that occur over the next 200 years. You know what I mean? So when the reviews come in, let's get back together if that's okay with you.
Sure, that'd be great.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Oh, and they're all thanking you, and I thank you. Yeah, seems like the audience is. Yes, please come back. I will have him back, Mormon Yeshiva. Was the phone conversation loud enough, you guys? I'm going to attempt to upgrade my ability to carry on interviews with people with the cameras as well. But I have seen phone interviews done before, and if it's done right, these are also very effective. Dr. Literski, you've been absolutely wonderful. Thank you again for coming on the show. I believe the audience really enjoyed it. Yep. Awesome. Thank you. Yes. We will have more Dr. Literski. Don't forget today at 2, Doug Vincent and I are going to have a conversation for a while. And tonight at 8, Cheryl Bruno will also add her insights. And tomorrow at 1 o'clock, I believe it's 1 o'clock, I am going to be talking to former Master Mason of a lodge and Master Mason Clinton Bartholomew, and I will be talking with him tomorrow at 1 about Method Infinite. And then, of course, tomorrow I'm going to be chattering and sharing new insights I have found from other Masonic materials. I'm going to do more settings today. I'm going to do more discussions tomorrow. I might have as many as 5 or 6 podcasts up, but this was one of the ones that I really, really, really wanted to get. And thank you again, Dr. Literski. So we are going to sign off for the moment. 2 o'clock. Let's see, it's 11:30. I may very well do another one between 1 and 2 and then get Doug Vincent on, because there's so much of this stuff that we have that we can share. So everybody, thank you for showing up. Our pleasure. Dr. Literski, once again, you are a pleasure to talk to. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
My good pleasure.